Six in Praetorius means thus always to tyrants.
Okay.
So you're close. Yeah, getting there.
Always looking for tyranny.
Thus always to tyrants. I guess defeat. I don't know, because she's like
Yes.
doing that. But it's cool. It's a woman, and I don't know why she's got one boob out of her toga, but
Well, don't we all some days?
I know, right? Tits just flop out, you know. But
yeah, you're not careful. Perfectly normal, by
on
the
the
way.
back, it's got Velcro as well, and you can put your name tape from your military uniform. So it says Ellis on the back of my head. So it was kind of a way like everyone's there in uniform, and I can't be because of the certain situation.
So some certain asshole.
Yeah, and so it was really cool because it was my old first sergeant. He was getting a Legion of Merit award, which is a pretty big deal, and it was really neat to be there for him. And he told me that he's been quietly watching me from the sidelines, and he said that my true character has been showing during all of this time, and it really speaks to the kind of person I am, and like a guy that I just assumed was indifferent on the whole situation. He had already retired, and by the time everything went down and stuff, and so it was cool to catch up with him and realize how much of an impact I'm making to people that aren't necessarily telling me, and that's really cool too. That, you know, there's a lot of people that want to tell me how all the negative things, of course, about me, and there's some people that want to tell me all the love and support, and then there's a lot of people in between. I think that way, and they don't really DM me or message me, but they feel very supportive of me. And so a few people came out of the woodwork today at that ceremony and was just like, "Hey, I saw you doing this and doing that, and that's really cool, and I think that's great." And uh, it was cool. It was a cool experience. Plus, I got to touch another helicopter. I got to touch a Black Hawk. So it was right there, and I just went like that. I just went deek, and I was like, okay, now I've transed it.
Yeah. So when he says like you're being true to yourself, is obviously because of like sort of the way you've been able to hold your sort of head up high in the media and sort of put a positive portrayal about your experience, or when he says like you're being true to yourself, is it the dick jokes?
No, it's not the dick jokes. But yeah, I mean that too, I guess. But it's more so just he just said your character, like how you're handling it, like.
Cool.
And I've heard other people say this. He didn't say this, but I've heard other people say like you could have reacted all of these other ways. You could have like spiraled. You could have gone quiet. You could have cursed the president. Like you could have done a lot of things, and instead you really showed your character by focusing on
like
the core aspects
the kind of person
of
we want to keep in the military.
Exactly. So I thought it was just really sweet. It was just really sweet of him, you know.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure, like, you know, despite what you might read on Twitter or whatever, my guess, and I think you said this before, is probably the vast majority of active service members probably are on Team Joe.
Or just don't really care. Like, it doesn't bother them, you know?
But I would think, like, you know, I'm not saying it's necessarily topmost on a lot of people's minds, but the thought of we're kicking people out who are competent, even if I don't understand why people are trans, or this is not something I'd want for someone in my family, they would still be kind of like...
Exactly. Because that's the whole conservative libertarian view, is meritocracy, if you're not hurting me, what does it matter? And when it comes to trans in the military... You still have to meet the standards, and that's where all, of course, the misconceptions come in, is that we've been given some other standard and we haven't. And so people who are in know it, they're like, no, I don't agree with that. I wouldn't do that. I think it's weird that Joe is doing that, but Joe is still a competent pilot. All right, your eyes are shadowed.
Eyes are shadowed. Lips are contoured. Okay, hair is damp. Let's go. Hey, Joe.
Yeah, mine are shadowed too, but it's because of the hat. But I don't want to.
They're actually in the shadows of your brim.
I want to have like this huge trucker hat.
As always, you look lovely.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm always trying to balance it with hats because some people wear hats in recordings, and it's just like, what are you doing? You can't even see your eyes. So it's I
can see your eyes.
Yeah, you have to like play with the like. Okay, I need it high enough, but not so high that I look.
That helps.
No, I was like, I just need it high enough, but not so high that I look like a hillbilly with like their hat way up, you know. But anyway, yeah. So, like we were talking about with the military, like it's interesting. There's been a new development in that space. So the Department of the Air Force. So all branches, just to kind of give a backstory, all branches said, look, all trans people out of the military, and then there was a bunch of different avenues you could self-identify and they called that voluntary separation, and you would get basically severance. So you get like extra pay for doing that for a short amount of time. Then they had involuntary, which was if we eventually find you and find out that you're trans, then we won't give you the extra pay, but you'll still get an honorable discharge and all of that. And then there was another option because some trans service members are right on the cusp of early retirement. It's called TERA, TERA. I don't remember what it stands for, but basically at 18 years of service, you can retire early. Most people can. Just generally, 18 years is an early retirement you can get. But there's a lot of trans folks like myself that are in the 15 to 18 year window where we've pretty much earned the majority of our pensions and stuff, but we're not quite at the 18-year mark. So surprisingly, the military was like, well, we're doing this to y'all, we're kicking y'all out. We're going to give an exception to that policy for anyone who meets the trans criteria of the executive order. 15 to 18 years, you can apply for an exception to get the early retirement, and you will get whatever is prorated to the year you're at. So if me 16 years, I would get a 16-year retirement instead of the 18. That in the Air Force, they approved a lot of them. Like just about all of them got approved, and they cut orders. So in the military, you get an order for going places, active duty, whatever, and then you also get a retirement order saying you are ordered to retirement and all of these things you get and kind of thing. And that basically means like it's a done deal. You've got your orders, you're good to go. And the Department of the Air Force, whoever's acting as the Secretary of the Air Force, I forget what it was. It was signed, the memo was signed by someone who was acting on the behalf, I think, of a vacancy. Yeah. And that person decided to reject all of them. There was an Excel spreadsheet attached to that memo that wasn't shared, and that was the list of all the names. So all these trans people that were 15 to 18 years of service, it was in a huge spreadsheet, and they'd all been given orders.
This is normally confidential information, I'd imagine.
The spreadsheet would be, the memo not so much, but the spreadsheet, the attached spreadsheet would have been. And so the other day, they just canceled all the orders like across the board. And then that memo came out saying, look, we're not going to approve any of these because in the guidance, it says may approve. Like it's not a for sure, but it's like, here's an exception and it's an option that we might approve. And it just has to be approved at that Secretary of the Department level. And so it was already approved at some point because orders got cut and a bunch of stuff started happening. People started planning their lives because they had their retirement dates. They were good to go. And then they just ripped it all away and said, actually, we're canceling all those orders and we're not approving anybody. And this is just the Air Force so far, but we think other branches are going to do the same. And now these people are being given the option for voluntary separation, which still gets the severance, but that means they don't get their pension. They don't get a lot of other things that come with retirement. And it kind of blew up because we're already getting screwed. Like, we're being pushed out.
If you actually want to retire.
Yeah. And here's a good example. One of my friends who retired from the military did over 20 years. And his response to me sharing that memo wasn't, oh, that sucks. It was, well, I had to do 20 years. Why do trans people not have to do 20 years? And it's like, do you not understand that we would have done 20 years if we had been allowed? We're perfectly capable of doing 20 years, but someone is keeping us from doing that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, of course we'd do 20 years if we could. We're not asking for a freebie. We're just asking like, hey, if you're going to screw us like this, give us at least what we've earned up until this point. And
this would be something that if you had any other medical condition at this point in your Army career, and you had to separate because whatever, you developed bad diabetes or you developed a heart condition or whatever it was, you would get this retirement, even if it was only...
You wouldn't get this retirement. You'd get an even better one. You'd get a medical retirement, which would give you a bunch of medical benefits on top of your retirement.
But you would get your pension.
You would definitely get whatever pension you had earned up until that point. And so that's the other thing this guy said. He was like, oh, well, you could still medically retire. I'm like, we can't because we're deployable. We are not broken, so we don't qualify for medical retirement. You only qualify for medical retirement if you've got something that requires you to be forced out. service connected.
But isn't that the whole conceit behind this? That
exactly.
because you're so psychologically unwell, that you can no longer serve effectively, and therefore we have to separate you.
Right.
Does that not? But when it comes down to an actual calling it a medical deferment, they're like, no, it's not really a medical deferment.
Well, that's the thing, right? So it's like we joined, and at some point we transitioned after joining. At least in my case, there are some people that joined and then already transitioned, but there's people like me who did not get diagnosed with gender dysphoria until well into service. And because of that, there was an option to stay in and transition and treat it. And so I took that option. And now I'm disqualified because of a medical reason. That's what they're using in the executive order. But it's not a medical reason that I could get a medical retirement from. So because I'm not disabled. I'm completely capable of working and flying. I could go fly for the airlines tomorrow. It just doesn't make any sense that you'll let a commercial airliner. You'll let a commercial airliner with hundreds of people, basically a flying rocket, a bomb that could blow up anything, buildings, for goodness sake. Hello, 9/11. That's totally fine for trans people, but a tiny little Black Hawk helicopter, heaven forbid, we let you stay in, and we're not going to give you a medical retirement because it's not really disabling. We just don't like that you are this way. It's so backwards. And so this whole retirement thing is just another knife wound. First of all, they could have not offered it to us, the exception to early retirement, and there wouldn't be a hoopla over it. We would just be getting screwed. But the fact that they offered it and then approved it and then gave people orders and then said, no, we're taking it back now.
It sounds like a classic, military catch-22. There's no...
you're just screwing us for no reason. Think about it this way. If I go to somewhere and, the price of something is whatever price and it's a little bit different, most companies honor their mistake. Yeah. The Air Force, the military values, this goes against that more so than me dressing like a woman, goes against it, is what they said in the executive order.
It's tragic. It's an embarrassment. I agree with you. Even as a non-American, I can see how this dishonors, these types of decisions dishonors the entire sort of ethos behind, the military. And I like to be hopeful for the future. I recognize we're in a bad spot right now, but I do think there is going to be a reckoning for this. So I feel badly for you because I know this is very personally affecting you.
Sure.
You obviously know other people in your networks who this is connecting and whom this is going to be a very difficult thing to manage, not having retirement income and, having to find other work and having to maintain whatever standard of living and comfort, that you had. But I do believe that there is going to be, at some point, some reckoning with what we've become. And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be owed. And you're going to be one of those people. If you can be patient and wait that long, I'm not saying you should have to, but right. I do like to think that there will be a time of reckoning for all these monsters who are making horrible, horrific decisions, specifically the kind of decisions targeting people like you and me. And like I said, I think a lot of the work that you're doing, whether it's in comedy or in your various media appearances, are really sort of highlighting the absolute depravity and the lack of any rational justification behind these decisions. So anyone who isn't so deep in the tank in their transphobia, who sees those kind of things and hears your story, they know who the bad guy is here.
Sure.
And it's not you. Like I said, I think you will get, I don't know how cold those just desserts are going to be served, but right. You are going to get them at some point, and I hope you enjoy them when you do.
Well, success is the best revenge, and
yes.
There's another issue with the discharges. Is right now the policy says to discharge us, regardless of whichever path we get separated, we're supposed to be discharged under the code of cannot ever rejoin. I think it's RE3, and then another code called JDK, Juliet Delta Kilo, which means national security concern. And so what that does is that that's the same code they used for gay people before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And what that code does is I'm 90 miles from DC. There's a bunch of defense contractors that require a clearance. And every time I go to get my clearance renewed, because I have a clearance, every time I go to get it renewed, they're going to pull my military records and be like, why do you have a national security concern code like on your separation?
Yeah. And is that explainable to people?
Well, only if they take my word for it. Well, I'm trans, and they gave me that code because that's what they gave all trans people. Like, I could get passed up without even having a chance to say that, right? Like in the process. And so there's a law firm that we're probably going to have to sue the government. So it's like not only are we getting kicked out and all this shit sucks, but it's like now we're going to have to fight just to make sure they don't like fuck us over in the long run for something that like they said we could be. They said we could do this, you know?
Yeah,
and it's just like, why? Like, it's so fucked up. Like,
well, I'm glad to hear that it sounds like you and I'm sure other people affected this. Anyone in that class will hopefully find a sympathetic lawyer and be able to put a class action in on this, and hopefully eventually win on the merits. Because I think I think your case is strong. But the fact that you have to do this is so unfortunate,
right.
And like I said, I think just shows a complete lack of respect and appreciation for the contributions that you and thousands upon thousands of other trans service members have done, putting your lives on the line, setting whatever civilian lives you could have had aside in defense of the country and its values. It's shameful.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. Multiple deployments, global war on terror, like you name it, and
being separated from your family, not knowing
all of that, and we're not getting even the same kind of separation that if a day before the executive order I decided to leave, I would have left with a better setup, right? Like if I was at 18 years, I would be able to retire, like, but I'm at 16, so it's just like really, guys, like. Come on, I wanted to do 15 more years. Like, I'm an indefinite because I'm a pilot. So as long as I'm healthy, I can go until like 60. And I wanted to do that, and not because of my own ambitions, but because it was service. Like, I served part-time to the state of Virginia, or Commonwealth of Virginia, and that's because I love my state and I love service. That's just who I am as a person. So
I think it's just like being vicious to trans people is such a like I was saying, it plays so well with the loudest, most vocal portion of the MAGA base that in any way that they can just sort of rub more mud in your face is something they're just going to do, because it's going to get hoots and hollers from whatever the 10 or 15% of the population who are really, really hate trans people. And are willing to sort of crow about it on social media and on talk shows and on Fox News and on Breitbart and wherever else. So I just think like the derision and the joy they get at that, the joy they find in their cruelty. This just sort of rewards that sinner. Anyways, it's
right. But, thanks for letting me vent.
no, that's worth venting about. Like that's, and I think as this government continues to sort of, go further and further and see how far they can push the envelope in their sort of war against us, there are going to be more and more people who are going to have these moments and are going to have very appropriate reasons to vent. I know the military has always been the tip of the spear. I'm like I said, as much as I feel badly that it's you who's having to take this on, I'm also in a way, our best and our brightest are the ones who are probably best equipped to take this on. So I think. Well,
they just turn thousands of capable, trained warfighters into political advocates, possibly.
Yeah.
Like you're just making your lives harder because we're the type of people you would want.
Yeah, you guys know how to fight a war.
You would want us in the conservative party. You would want us as Republicans. Like, we are most likely Republicans by a lot of the things we are and believe, but we're not now. Like, I can't vote red. Like if you're going to do this to me, how can I possibly vote for someone who supports these policies?
Yeah, no, it's just viciousness. Yeah, so, before we bring our guest on, I just wanted, just to talk about something, and I know we've talked about in the past, which is, we've talked a bit about sort of, I know we've talked in the past a little bit about pediatric medical transition and a lot of the issues around, how we talk about detransitioners. And I think this is in the context that we are about to have a guest on who, the day of the taping, announced their detransition. And, sort of sparked a little bit of a conversation about how in the trans community we talk about detransitioners. And I think how we have to, for lack of a better term, like when we are from a speaking from a neutral perspective and trying to understand about how we talk about detransitioners. And one of the things that's always been troubling is because the detransitioner narrative has been used as I think, a very effective cudgel against supporting transition, because when detransitioners tell their story, particularly when it's coming from a young person who felt they were trans at some point in their early lives, had access to medical therapies and sometimes surgical therapies to transition, and then recognized later, for whatever reason, that this is not the path they want to, that this is not the path they want to continue to follow, that and often are upset or feel upset about the choices they made, about how do we, that's a very scary outcome for people. And when people start talking and start getting the sense that this is happening a lot, that there are a lot of young people, and in particular young male females, people born as women, who this story seems to come from, it generates a lot of opposition towards the whole concept of transitioning. And not just, often focused at pediatrics, because a lot of these stories come from people who started their transition while they were teenagers, but also moving into young adults, because a lot of them are also, young adults. And it sort of lends fuel to the fire that often leads to people to say, not only should we not allow children or adolescents to transition, but we might even want to extend it into adulthood, because clearly there's these bad outcomes, that are happening. But one thing we don't really know is we've never had a real high quality study about detransitioners to answer a few very pertinent questions, which is, how often is this happening? And a lot of trans advocates will say that number is very low, but that number comes from data sources that are not always reliable, either because they're older data sources where people transitioning were much rare, and probably only the most, and the kind of people who were being offered transition services were probably the best candidates and the most the best screened, and thus the most likely to succeed and the least likely to have a detransition outcome. Or they come from self-report, which is that they do a survey and people answer it, but the kind of people who answer this survey and say, yes, I'm satisfied with my transition, are obviously are going to be the kind of people who would be more likely to answer a survey like that.
Sure.
Whereas the kind of people who detransition aren't going to want to answer this survey. So the numbers end up looking probably artificially low. And then because in the modern era, we have more natal females who are transitioning, we have more people who are starting younger, who appear, and I'm not going to say that they do because it's always hard to know, that appear to be more obviously female presenting or classically feminine presenting, and who seem to acknowledge their dysphoria later in their lives, or later in their adolescence at the very least, that these people seem, for whatever reason, to be having worse outcomes of their transitions. They seem to be detransitioning more, but we don't have any data source to give us exact numbers on how often this is happening. So why I wanted to bring this in is that one of the world's foremost researchers on detransition is a Canadian researcher based at York University here in Toronto, where I live, whose name is Kinnon McKinnon. And Kinnon McKinnon is, like I said, probably the world's foremost researcher on detransitions. And he has a very unique perspective as well, because he is trans himself, and he's in his 40s now. He transitioned in his early 20s from a natal female, transitioned to male, and his entire professional career has been as a man. But he's taken an interest in this population, and he was given a grant to do one of the largest studies on detransitioners. And over the course of this, he surveyed nearly 1,000 detransitioners. So 1,000 people who had detransitioned for any number of reasons. And in the New York Times today, he wrote a guest essay basically giving us a preview of what he found. It's not the full paper. We don't have the full data set. But he was talking a little bit about like what he learned through this experience of interviewing over 1,000 detransitioners. And the key things that I think are worth sharing is that 1,000 is a big number.
Yeah.
It's maybe not as many people as there are trans people in Canada and the US who this was drawn from, but it's an appreciable number.
Sure.
And it's not enough to tell us what the percentage of people who detransition is, but it's enough to sort of tell me that this isn't a handful of people who are detransitioning. This is an appreciable number. Whatever the denominator is, whatever the pool that these detransitioners are coming from, we don't know the exact size of it, but once you get into the thousands, that's 1,000 lives. Whether that's 1% of the population or 5% or 10% of the potential population, it's, who could have answered this survey, it's an appreciable number of people. The more important point is he looked at the reasons why these 1,000 people were detransitioning. And he basically separated them into 4 groups. So the 4 groups that he talks about are the first kind are people who said they detransitioned because it was just too hard. They wanted to keep transitioning, but because they didn't have money, they couldn't get the treatment they needed, they were facing discrimination, they were being separated from their families, they stopped. And many of them wished they didn't have to stop, but they had to stop, and they were kind of making their best with sort of the cards they were dealt, that they were still living in their natal sex, but they said under different circumstances they would have kept transitioning. There was another quarter, basically, who said that they felt at the time sincerely that their gender identity was different than the one they were born in, but over the course of the process, they began to understand that maybe this wasn't the right path to take, and they voluntarily detransitioned, but they were not regretful. In other words, they thought this was an important experience of their life. They didn't feel that the consequences of having transitioned were so severe that they couldn't go on with their lives, or they thought it was an important lesson to have learned, and whatever happened, happened. But they were happy with their choice to detransition. So they were like the non-regretful detransitioners who recognized that their birth gender was the gender they wanted to continue to live on as, but they did not regret the experience of having gone through a transition experience. And then there was a third group that basically sort of said that they had a lot of mental health challenges and other things that they think motivated their detransition, and they felt that maybe this could have been handled differently, like maybe their mental health issues should have been dealt with, but they weren't necessarily angry about it. They were a bit regretful. They were like, I wish I didn't have to have gone that way, but they sort of took ownership of their struggles. And then the last group are the ones that probably get the most press, which is about 33% of their patients who said that they felt that they were sort of led down a garden path.
Like coerced,
coerced or misdiagnosed, and that they did this, and then they were kind of abandoned, and they felt strong regret, is how he described it, as far as their decision to transition. And the thing that's most important about this is this fits the classic story that I think most of us understand. So when they looked at these 33% of people who were regretful and, detransitioners, so these are the kind of people who find their place in the media and who are giving testimony to things like places like the Federal Trade Commission in an attempt to sort of support bans for pediatric care, people like Chloe Cole, and, is probably the most, notable one, are that 90% of them are natal females. So these are not the young natal boys who transition. 90% of them are natal females. Most of them were about 30% of them had taken it so far as to have surgery, obviously mostly chest surgery like mastectomies, and that most of them, their trans identity was recognized in adolescence. So these were not people who were boyish or tomboyish necessarily as young children, but people who during the course of their puberty came to believe that they had dysphoria.
So this is 30% of the 1,000 people?
The 30% of the 1,000 people fell into this, and they were mostly, I'm saying, they were mostly young women and mostly people who had other mental health issues and felt that their gender dysphoria came on during adolescence.
The cohort that you and I have been most concerned about.
The cohort that you and I and many other people have been most concerned about, that these stories about young women or I should say young natal females who have what is sometimes described as rapid onset gender dysphoria, but I think it's more accurately described as rapid awareness of gender dysphoria.
Right. Yeah.
Or is, you know, these, and I think and I think most clinicians were recognizing this before the bans went into place, and had already started taking measures to be more cautious about how they manage those, at least at care centers that are still delivering high quality care. So I think there's something to learn here, which is that, you know, because of the poor care and the poor discretion that was applied in making treatment decisions along some of these younger or these natal females who are not classically trans, who had a lot of other mental health issues, and who this was almost certainly the wrong therapy for them, it's ended up costing a lot of the people who we recognized as being the good candidates for transition, even as adolescents, the chance to get that therapy. Now, this isn't a dispositive study. We still don't know what the exact rates are. Right. We don't obviously have the outcomes of all the other people who might keep transitioning, but maybe are still experiencing regret and haven't detransitioned yet, or feel that because they're already committed to this pathway that they're going to keep on it. We know there's path dependence potentially involved here, but I think it's a really important story to get out there that not every person who transitions likely has the same likelihood of detransitioning later,
right?
And how we need to be so much more cautious about this cohort.
Do we see this with other things? Like, you're the medical professional, not me.
Sure.
Like, I've always heard people argue, like, oh, well, the more people regret elective breast augmentations and more people regret hip replacements. And do we see this kind of like sensitivity to 33% of 1,000 people with anything else?
I don't know exact numbers, but we do know, like, what are the kind of, you know, when you think about what, like, regret, just as a human experience, but what makes us regret things in general? Whatever decisions we made in our life. Should I have gone out with that guy? Should we have gotten married? Should we have had kids? Should I have stayed in school? Or should I have, you know, whatever those decisions are, there's a number of personality types that are more likely to experience regret, or more likely, let's say, to be impulsive in their decision-making, or not as well considered in their decision-making, that are more likely to experience feelings of regret later. And when we think about personality types, you know, we often, the classic personality description would be the borderline personality disorder types, which are the kind of people who feel emotions very strongly, are often impulsive in their decision making, are very reliant on other people, and very dependent on the feelings of other people to determine how they feel about things, who may make bad decisions on impulse, which also then lead them down bad paths. And so those kind, you know, people have already commented, especially among this young female cohort, that they are more likely to experience these types of personality issues, these dependent personalities, these borderline personalities. So this isn't surprising to me in that way, because I suspect a lot of these people make a lot of regrettable decisions just by the nature of their personality.
That's what I was going to ask, like, if that same person, you know, did SSRIs or something else, would they also regret that if it had consequences, right?
And I don't want to minimize, like, undergoing a gender transition, I say this time and time again, it's very consequential.
Sure.
It does, you know, it changes your life.
But so is teen pregnancy.
Oh, yes.
That choice is completely fine, right? Like, oh, you shouldn't have gotten pregnant, but you made that choice. And it's like, well, they still regret it.
Yes.
But now we're like, we need to prevent teen pregnancy because some people regret it. It's like, well, but you can't ban it. Like, it's just,
these are some of the same arguments that have often been used to support abortion bans, because people, you know, someone gets an abortion, you know, and even the data on that's really poor, but people would make this argument that it's the post-abortion regret, that people get abortions and they regret it later, and of course you can't undo your abortion any more than you can, you know, undo a mastectomy. You know, so these are important concepts. Anyways, I think I posted this on Twitter. I have a subscription to the New York Times, so I shared it with everybody. So anybody who's reading this who hasn't had a chance to read it, do read this article, and I'm really interested for when the full paper comes out in a few months. That'll actually provide more of the granular details, because I think this is going to be a very effective piece of research. And like I said, the lead researcher is very sympathetic to detransitioners and their narratives, and he expresses a lot of regret himself about the role that detransition is playing in justifying governmental decisions to cut off.
I mean, this is what we need. We need people to investigate this stuff. We can't just keep going off of anecdotes and some of the loudest few. Like, for both arguments, for transition and against it. Like, I want the best data so that way people can make the best decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and like I've said before, I'm not pro pediatric medical transition. I'm not against it.
Right.
What I'm for is, what is the best strategy that creates the most healthy adults?
Yeah.
And if that means some transition for some and not for others, so I'm not someone who's like, everybody must be affirmed because on principle. No. I'm like, I want people to have access to the therapy that is most likely to make them into healthy, functional adults. And for some people, that choice is likely going to be transition. And for some people, that choice is likely going to be their physician telling them, no, this is really a bad idea. And that's sort of the ideal that I want going forward, where it's not like we must transition every child who says they're dysphoric, or we cannot transition any child who says they're dysphoric. So the reason I want to talk about detransition also is because I think it's a nice lead-in to our guest today. So, like as I said, detransition narratives have been getting a lot of attention in the media. They've been getting a lot of attention in front of congressional committees. Their stories have been used to provide a very sympathetic, someone that, stories are very sympathetic to the general public, that tends to rally them behind the concept that offering young adults and adolescents the opportunity to transition is a bad idea because there's a number of people who don't do well and whose stories become very compelling.
Yep.
And one of the things that we don't hear as much is the other side, which is what happens to people who transition young and are happy with those. And there's a lot of reasons why we don't hear those stories very much. Is because many children who transition and do it successfully want to move on with their lives. They started as natal females, they're now living as men. They started as natal males, they're now living as women. When people transition young, their chance of being able to assimilate is much higher because they will not be carrying the baggage of a full life and full sort of life story of having to live and mask as living as a male if they were born male. And they also will not have a lot of the physical changes, especially for young boys, where the effects of testosterone on your facial appearance, on your body structure are quite pronounced. Sure. It makes it much harder to pass and to assimilate, later in life. And so a lot of these young men and young women, after they transition, just want to move on, and they don't want to tell their stories, and they don't want to go public. A lot of them go stealth. They want to live in a way that, aside from their closest intimates, that nobody knows that they grew up in a different sex than the one that they're currently presumed to be living as. And so this is so we don't hear these stories because most of these people are out just living with their families and raising lives and working at their jobs and just enjoying the fact that they were able to be granted this ability to live in a way that is congruent with their gender identity. So it's very hard to find these people, and even when you do find these people, they're not very willing to tell their stories, at least in front of the public.
But we found one.
We found one. But we did find one, and she, because this is, I'm going to say a young woman, she's still young by my standards, who over the last few years has been telling her story on social media. And the reason that she came out is very much the same reasons why I came out. We thought it was important to put a public face on people who are relatable to the general public, who were living assimilated lives, and recognizing that this is an outcome that happens, and it happens a lot. But the reason you're not hearing it is most of us are not willing to speak up.
Sure.
And she recognized the same. She's English, and she recognized, of course, a lot of this the anti-trans rhetoric that was building in England, and thought it was important to get her story out. And I came across her because she wrote a post that went viral where she was talking directly to J.K. Rowling about her experience as a young person who had access to pediatric medical transition and is now 25 years later and has had an incredibly, by her standards, a very happy and successful life, and wanted that story to be out there. Of course, J.K. Rowling was very dismissive of this and said, no matter what, you're still a man, etc., etc. But these are the stories that we need to hear. And when we find someone who is willing to come public and be willing to say them and be willing to share them, I think it's important to give them a platform. And so I'm happy we're able to give that platform today to our guest, whose name is Theresa Verity. So you might recognize her handle from Twitter or from X, but whereas you may have only heard her or know of her because of reading her posts, today we're going to have the opportunity to hear from her in person. So I'm going to bring her in. Hello, Theresa.
Hi. Hello.
Hi there. So I know. So we have with us Theresa. Theresa is joining us. So we just obviously you don't know this, but we've just been sort of talking about you. Only nice things about why we're having you on the show today. I know you've had a chance. We had a chance to talk a little bit earlier, but maybe for the purposes of our audience, anyone who might be watching the Transnormal Pod, maybe just take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us why you're here today.
Sure thing. So yes, my name is Theresa. I live in the United Kingdom, and I suppose my kind of claim to fame, I guess, if you want to call it that, is that when I was a teenager, I was prescribed GnRH agonists, more commonly known as puberty blockers, by the Gender Identity Development Service and the Middlesex Hospital's endocrinology department. This was back in 2000, so quite a long time ago, significantly longer ago, in fact, than most of the narratives about our treatment maintain it happened. Treatment protocols were slightly different then. You weren't allowed to have them prescribed under the age of 16. That changed in I think it was 2011, wasn't it? When Susie Green campaigned for it with mermaids. But basically, I was one of the mermaids kids.
Wow.
It's patients. Kind of the OG set, if you like.
So to provide a little bit of context for some of our, I know a lot of us are sort of very deep into this, into the narrative. So you had mentioned you were treated at the GIDS at the center, which is sort of in more modern times is probably better known for the notoriety around it. So this is the gender identity service that was provided to children at the UK, and I think at the time was provided in one place at the Tavistock Centre, which was sort of the one place in the UK where if you were a dysphoric youth who was seeking to transition, that you would have been referred to this one centre that had the authority to prescribe puberty blockers, I think when you were saying at that point, once you turn 16, and I guess eventually cross-sex hormones. So this was the path that young people could access transition services to allow them to live their lives in a way that was congruent with their gender identity as adults. And many people know it now because it's been recently shut down because of a lot of the controversy about the concern about maybe having bad outcomes or improper care or incomplete care that has now led, and we'll get into this a little bit later, to pediatric care being completely banned in the UK. So basically the main reason why I want to have Theresa on is she's a story we don't hear very much these days, which is someone who transitioned young as an adolescent, was offered the kind of therapies that are no longer available in the UK and in many parts of the US, or difficult to access in certain parts of Europe. But as opposed to the stories we're hearing all the time now about sort of the people who access these types of services who are regretful about it and are telling their stories with the hopes of supporting bans, is we just don't get to hear the stories very much of people who've lived amazing lives like Theresa, who are now 25 years older. Sorry if I'm making you seem old there. Who are here with us and willing to tell their stories. So, Joe, anything you want to ask Theresa?
What was it like? 2000. I can't even imagine. Like, there's not a whole lot of. Was it very like hush hush? You just didn't want to let anyone know what was going on, or what was that process like going through that?
So I think it's probably worth kind of highlighting like the social climate at the time. We were like fully into the era of like Jerry Springer. Most people's conception of like what a trans woman was like was very different to how it is now. There was a lot of just kind of baseline ignorance, really. Like most of how the UK population saw us at the time was under the shadow of the Section 28 legislation that banned basically any kind of education about like any kind of gender non-conformism. People just thought it was like a gay thing, but like super gay, if you get what I mean.
Yeah,
that was like
I
the general
remember
kind
that.
of
Yeah,
uninformed.
I remember that. It was like, oh, you're so gay,
Yeah,
you want to be a woman or something. Yeah.
that was how a lot of people saw us, and like
Okay.
it wasn't really on most people's radars. Like, I got very lucky at the time. Like most young people had no idea that such a service even existed or that like treatment was possible. Um, I I guess I lucked out. I had a very receptive and very helpful GP who listened to what I said about how I was feeling and was like, I have no idea what's going on here. I've never encountered this before. Like it makes sense, but like, you know, I was the one who was telling her how I felt. It was such a different environment to how it is now.
So that's so incredible because, like, and I'm thinking, and I really want to hear sort of almost the lead up. Not even, I do want to hear about sort of what happened once you got to the GIDS, but also to the extent that you're comfortable sharing it, sort of like sort of the lead up, because I think what we all share to some degree is that feeling of growing up, having feelings that were clearly different or that you felt were different than any other person that you would know growing up. So, and to have the courage to sort of tell your family, even that this is something I think I want, or your GP, that I'm having these feelings. I don't know entirely what they mean, but I feel this way and I really think I need to do something about it. Is making that step is probably, I think, the hardest step. Maybe it's easier now, but it was definitely the hardest step back then. So what was it like? Like, what was your childhood like? Like, how did you understand yourself?
Yeah, walk us through the whole thing.
Yeah,
like from
early
thoughts all the way up.
Yeah, you're as someone who is, from whether you recognize it from earliest memories or sometime in your childhood. What was that like at that time where you're in the Jerry Springer age, or
yeah. So it took me a while to be able to contextualize how I was feeling in a way that like was a coherent description, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Like if you don't know the words for things and you've literally never encountered the words for how you're feeling, like it doesn't change the fact that you're feeling it, right? So I grew up on a farm in the English countryside, and my world was quite small. It was quite narrow, and I'd never encountered any of the terminology or anything like that. I was able to kind of identify how I was feeling around the age of 6. We're still living on a farm then, and it was just I just kind of assumed that like maybe it was just something that people felt, and that at some point maybe it was going to go away, or I don't know. Like when you're 6 years old, right?
Do you know
a
how
lot
to
about
describe?
The world doesn't make sense.
Do you know how to describe what that was at 6 years old? You were feeling like now looking back, like what was it? Like what were the thoughts and feelings where you felt like, oh, everyone must feel this way?
So a lot of it was to do with like my interface with like femininity, like with sister, for example, with my mother compared with my father. Like I kind of saw myself and saw the future self that I was going to be. It was like there was this huge disconnect. I was just like, but like I'm not a boy. Again, it was very hard to describe, very hard to kind of articulate, but like I knew something was up.
Yeah, and so I think this is this is something very similar to to like how I felt too. And you said something that I remember you posted about, and I said I've said the same thing, where it was like when you're having these feelings, you think both at the same time. You hold these two paradoxical views of like nobody else feels like this way, and what if everybody else feels this way? But not willing to put that on the line and sort of like going to another boy and saying like, I'm feeling this. Do you feel this too? Because there's a lot of rules about being a boy and what you can say without getting your nose bopped, or what will make you the laughing stock of the playground. And so you hold these secrets.
Yes.
But you're right. And the reason I think also these narratives are important is because, and I don't, I'll lead with mine, which is that while I wasn't a masculine boy, I wasn't rough and tumble, I also wasn't airy-fairy. And so like that femininity that people often see in boys who grow up to be homosexual, not all boys who grow up to be homosexual, were very different. Like, I was just sort of a quiet, withdrawn kind of, had lots of feelings, but not necessarily ones that were, but I wasn't sort of prancing. Now, so was this something that your parents recognized early, or is it something that you eventually had to come to them with?
So, no, that's an interesting one. This wasn't in any way, shape, or form like something that came from my parents at all. It was like, I guess my mum probably just saw me as, a kid who was in touch with his feminine side or whatever. I don't really know. I mean, I don't think it was really. I don't think it's really on their radar because, like, I think most parents, if they don't have any kind of background or education in this kind of thing, and it's not something that's talked about, like, I think my mum was just like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, I was brought up in a fairly neutral environment. Like, most of our toys were like Lego bricks and that kind of thing. And like, I had like a doll, like a newborn doll, and I had like a toy gun and all sorts. And like, it was a widespread. Like, I've never really held truck with a lot of this kind of stuff about stereotypical childhood toys. Like, I just kind of play with everything.
Yeah.
So walk us through from there on. So you start having these feelings at 6, and you, like you said, and like I felt like you justified as like, oh, everyone must think this way. And sure, maybe some people think, what would it be like to be the other sex? But not everyone like obsesses over it or really becomes envious, like to the point of despair at times, right? And so I would love to hear, like, what was it like just going through from then on to the point of actually taking action? What was that whole interim period like? And walk us through, like, in your mind, all the steps and calculations you were making.
Yeah, okay. So I knew something was up. I didn't have the words to describe it. I remember various conversations I had with like other kids at the time at school, and it kind of became clear to me quite early on that like this wasn't a normal thing that people felt or experienced, and very quickly learned to shut up about that at school. That didn't stop other kids from kind of twigging that there was something up with me. So I got kind of intermittent waves, I guess, of bullying, and like a lot of it, nobody had a name for it at the time, but like other kids could definitely tell something up with me. And teachers could as well. In like, I guess in some ways I was kind of an easy target, maybe. But like, I don't know. But like, people often pick up vibes of things that they don't really know how to articulate. But like, this seems to be quite a common experience for a lot of kids who are in this position. Is that like the world around you realizes that the way that you interface with the world doesn't kind of match like stereotypical norms. And like I don't think that is hugely uncommon, but I think the way that I interface with it, it was very clear from quite early on, and certainly by the time I was about 10 or so, like the social dynamics that were manifesting within like social groups at school made it very clear that being an effeminate boy was not sexually acceptable at all. So I kind of found myself in a slightly awkward situation where I think a lot of kids in that position do, where you're like, who am I? How do I kind of define myself? How do I like take control of the narrative of my own life? And for a lot of us, the answer to that is we kind of, we find ways to kind of lash out at the system. Like I did a couple of things at school that got me into a lot of trouble, for example. And I think it's again that desperation to kind of like grab some sense of agency about yourself and the way that others are perceiving you. Something is up. You don't have a word for it. You couldn't like intellectually describe it in an academic sense, but it's still there nonetheless. So like this, I tried to get by for years and years. And my kind of light bulb moment, I guess, there were two things. I read a book at school called Bill's New Frock. I don't know if you're aware of it. It's quite popular in the UK curriculum. It's basically a story about a boy who wakes up one day and is a girl. And like the story just treats this as just
all of our dreams come true. Yeah.
The story kind of treats this as like, okay, this is the thing that happens. It's presented as like a moral lesson. Effectively, this is what girls go through, like the kind of expectations that are placed on teenage girls. The idea is,
like empathy. Empathy.
Exactly. It's a great little book. I couldn't articulate why at the time, but like this book I read it and I was like, oh my God, I took it home. I asked my mum if we could get a copy of it. Searched the local library. Like, I loved this book. It was the first time I had read anything as a kid that kind of, it felt like, oh my God, this is a story about someone like me. I mean, it kind of
a child protagonist.
It wasn't a trans story, but it was a gender transgressive story, and like the framing was like, oh, isn't this weird? Let's kind of follow this through. But for me, it was like, so like, if this happened, everything would be right. Like, this isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like the way girls are treated by society is awful and trash. And that was one of the things that the book was really kind of pushing. But like, there were like two layers, if you get what I mean. There was one layer of, yeah, okay, this sucks, and also like, but I'm a girl. This is if this happened, I mean, like, that would feel right. And I guess from that point onwards, I had a sense of like, but like, seriously, and
how do I make this happen?
Later, well, this is the thing. A couple of years later, I saw a documentary on TV. It was about what's his name, Dr. Mineko de Cheglie, and a small group of trans boys in the Netherlands who were like at a gender clinic, and it was talking about their treatment and like hormones they were taking.
This is the classic Dutch protocol.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, you can do something about this? Like, wow, okay. This is I had no idea. I kind of assumed that I'd just be locked into this, and suddenly it was
there's a way out.
Oh my God, there's a way out. I need to be absolutely sure that this is definitely how I feel. And like I took some time to seriously reflect on it and like confirm to myself whether I was actually genuinely feeling the same way as these kids or not. And like it didn't go away. And it was just like, I gotta do something. It's gonna be hell, but I've got to do something about this. I cannot endure things the way they are. So
how old were you when this happened? When this kind of I need to do something now occurred?
So I was about 11 at the time, and I was like, how do I find out more about this? Like, is this something that's available in the UK? And of course, at that time, it was incredibly hard to get any kind of information about this. And like, I was kind of scared about talking to my parents fully about this. Like, it is something that had come up a few times in the past, but like never in the, Mum, I need to do something right now.
You always just kind of like floated the idea gently or something, or how did she kind of like?
So like at this point in time, like I was being read as female by teachers in class about half the time. I had long hair. I insisted on having long hair. At one point I had my hair cut and it was like, oh no, this is not for me. And like, that doesn't inform anything about our sex in and of itself. Like people can have long or short hair, but it was very clear that for me this was part of a social perceptive package that like if I had long hair at that time and that age, then I was classified as a girl, and that was correct.
And you so liked being perceived that way and being treated that way.
Like, did you correct people when that happened at that point, or is it more like
it felt very normal to me? I didn't like the way that like the entire class would break out into laughter every single time it happened. But like, I was very much like, why is this a problem? You know what I mean? This seems kind of right.
I had that experience too of like I had longer hair as a little boy, and I had the same thing. Like I would secretly love, and like my heart would flutter when someone would be like, "Oh, that's a girl or whatever." Yeah. But then the correction from my sisters or my brother, or even from myself, out of fear of being found out, created this like visceral reaction, like "How dare you!" But at the same time, I was like, "Oh."
So I really like I really want to think about like sort of there's these inflection points, and like it's like one of the major ones is, of course, as soon as you tell someone, and imagine for most young people it's going to be your parents or a trusted adult, who you confide to and say, I have these feelings, whether it's like I know I need to do this or I'm not sure what I need to do. It's obviously a very brave step that one takes. You have this secret, or this whether you interpret it as a secret, or this sense of feelings of uncertainty about myself and where I fit in this world, and when you're holding it all in, it of course it eats you on the inside, but it's not real in a sense until you have to tell someone. And so I really think about these inflection points, because I think all of us growing up had these moments where it's like, maybe I should tell my parents now, or maybe I should do something that's going to make it obvious that I get discovered and I have to talk about this with my parents. So what, and obviously it also involves the relationship you have with your parents. And it sounds like what I'm getting at this is that your parents were people who obviously cared a lot about, like good parents do, who cared about you and supported you, and that who you felt comfortable at some point in seeing. Because I had these points too, where it's like, and I call them inflection points because I always think back now as someone who eventually did transition in her 20s, as what if, when this moment happened, I actually would have said, yes, this is what I'm feeling, as opposed to denying it. And so what was the time? Like, what was that moment when you finally felt, I've got to talk, or this is what I'm feeling, or this thing you're seeing, the reason you're seeing it is because? What was that like?
So I guess my kind of point where that became something that I was aware of and was sort of trying to make go away in a way. That flipped when I accidentally said too much to my grandmother. So we were on a car journey, and I said to her, as you know, as a lot of kids do, I said, she was quite religious, and I said to her, I just don't understand how God could let someone kind of grow up trapped in a body they hate. Like, what if people can be like born in the wrong body? I know it's a massive stereotype, a huge cliche nowadays that we try and avoid that kind of rhetoric. That was how I conceptualized it to myself. It was like, clearly something's up with my body. I should have been a girl. Like, I am a girl. Why did this not manifest? And I said this to my grandmother, and she just looked at me, and like there was a look in her eyes when I immediately realized I said too much, because she clearly understood. And like at that point, I was like, oh, this is going to be a problem, isn't it? And sure enough, she talked to my mum about it, and mum started getting very kind of like, you know, you know, you know that you can talk to me, right? If there's anything that's bothering you. And like after a while of this, I was also going through like that period where you kind of, you're trying to process how you're feeling, that you're repressing it, you're trying to crush it down, hope it goes away. It doesn't go away. You go through kind of cycles of like, oh my God, what the heck is wrong with me? And oh my God, what the heck is wrong with the rest of the world, right? And eventually, I was just like, oh, for God's sake. Okay, Mum, all right, here is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. Remember that documentary we watched? Like, this is me, okay? I've thought about this long and hard. This is where we are. And she was just like, oh, thank God, I thought you were on drugs or something. Yeah. And like, at that point, it was like, right, okay, I think we might be able to progress with this. You know what I mean? But by this point, I'd like heard various horror stories, and I was all prepared for like familial friction. Like, my mum's always been very chill and always very accepting of anything like this. My dad was like, straight into the army from school, like, so I wasn't too sure about that. Like, what a conservative upbringing, and at that time especially, like, there was a big thing in the army about that time about a soldier who had transitioned, but actually he was like, okay, well, I don't really understand it, but anyone who has the courage to do something like that has my respects. What do I need to do? What do you need? And I was just kind of amazed, And so we called up mermaids and went along to one of their AGMs while we're kind of waiting for like a referral from a GP to the Tavistock Jits. I'm sure everyone knows what mermaids is nowadays.
So mermaids is sort of like a support group for trans youth in the UK that was started by, I think it was by a mother who had a trans daughter herself.
Yeah. It was initially
I didn't know what it was.
It was initially like a tiny little support group for kids and families of patients at the Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service. And so Like we went along, and it was tiny. There was like maybe 20 of us there at most. But we met Bernadette Wren from the Tabby, and like one of the first conversations we ever really had was actually about transition regret and about the necessity of being absolutely certain. And like, I had that conversation, very, very important, very serious. And then like went off to the other kids. We watched Ma Vie en Rose.
Ma Vie en Rose.
Great movie. Yeah, awesome.
Love that.
But like when I was there, I had still never met another trans person until I turned up there. I met a trans girl at the time. She was like a few years ahead of me, and I was just like, "Oh my god,
yeah!
Oh my god, there is hope." Basically, yeah. It genuinely, it was like, "Oh my god, this can actually work out." Yeah. Like there is a possibility of a future for me that I'm happy about.
Yeah. And I think it really speaks to sort of a little bit of era effects, because this was around, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, for you. And, and I sort of think of similar moments in my adolescent life where I was presented with an opportunity to say something and to kind of admit, like, this is how I'm feeling, like, I don't, and I know these stories are common even among people who, like, this would have been the 80s for me. And, I think the differences even between 2000 and the 80s were fairly vast in terms of that the internet was at least there. You could find some information. Your parents probably had some knowledge or some exposure, even if they didn't know exactly what to do with that. And I remember, even for myself, my parents discovering all my things like clothing that I'd accumulated and was hiding in a corner of the closet, and coming down and presenting me with this bag of my clothes. At the age of 14 or 15, and me being like, "Oh, no, that's not what this is," and thinking like, what would have happened if I would have answered differently, and how would my life have been different? And I don't know how it would have been different, to be honest. Like, if I'm giving an honest accounting of it, because I don't know how they would have reacted, like the same way your parents would have in the late 90s and in the 2000s. And also just the importance of finally seeing yourself reflected in another person, which for me didn't happen until my 20s, where you were sort of fortunate in this the Mermaids group, and be able to meet other sort of, other girls who were like, okay, I see myself here. Like, this is a path. And then also contrasting it with how it would have been in the 2010s, or where, the narratives are coming out now, where it's like, sort of like, if, and I don't know how true these are in all cases, but of someone who can now find themselves very early because of so much material out there, and both that, the good and the bad of that, of there are kids who see themselves and recognize their transness from a very early age and are able to do something about it, at least before the more recent environment, where it was sort of like, okay, you're trans, let's do something about this, but also people presenting with this information that maybe aren't trans, but maybe being able to be convinced of it, and being led down, the concern of being led down another path. And so it's just really, like I said, I don't know if there's a question in there, but it's just really interesting about that, how we discover ourselves and how we start on this journey. So you start on this journey, you meet other women, other girls. What was it like then to go from, okay, I think I want to follow this path, to actually getting the care you needed? So were you at this point starting to present as feminine and taking on a female name and a female presentation in your, I guess you were in junior high, or whatever they call it in the UK? Like, were you starting to live at this? So what was it like from then to being able to actually get care from the GIDS?
So, I mean, in terms of care from the GIDS, there was a lot of talking at first. And like, I periodically got to London for appointments, and that was like, just a part of my life. Like, it became kind of normal quite quickly. At school, like, I was already in a zone where, like, there would be periodic waves of bullying because of the way I was, if you get what I mean. I was an effeminate kid who deliberately tried to look as kind of gender neutral at the time as I could get away with. And like a lot of my kind of personal fashion choices and similar were oriented around kind of providing me, if you like, with an alibi within which I could express myself while kind of tapping into like fashions of the time. So like I dressed very goth, for example, and we had like a strategic chat at some point where I was like, Mum, I want to look like the lead singer of Placebo because I think it is going to genuinely make this so much. So that I can't remember his name, the lead singer of the band Placebo.
Yeah, I know him.
Like that particular late 90s kind of goth, extremely androgynous.
Yeah, we'll put a picture up when we do the podcast.
But for me, like that was like, okay, this is a way to basically socially transition at school and like offset a lot of the abuse I would get for being like gender non-conforming, basically, but like kind of offset it in a way. It was quite a useful alibi, and I think a lot of the other trans kids, certainly in that era, came to the same conclusion. So, like, you know, there was one point where there was like a school disco, if you like, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally going as the lead singer of Placebo. Totally. I don't think anyone bought it, but you know.
Oh, that's funny. I wanted to ask, you talked a little bit about there being a lot of talk and regretting transition and stuff of being something that was covered. Do you know how you squared it that you wouldn't regret it at that age? Like, it's so young, like how do you really know, right? Or did you just feel like it was going to be so much better? Or tell me about it.
I think it's a really good question. And I think it's a really, really important question. Like, I think everyone who's in that situation at any age, but especially if you're like a teenager at the time, it requires sober self-reflection. I mean, you know,
something teenagers are famous for.
Yeah, I think it helps if you are a kid who has kind of grown up in a lot of ways in terms of your ability to consider your own relationship to the world. And like, I had a lot of time to think about this stuff. And I mean, I was kind of blessed in a way of being able to do it in an environment where you didn't have constant screaming about what has become an extremely divisive and extremely kind of crystallized politically matter. Like at that time, my existence wasn't political because it wasn't on anyone's political radar. Exactly. So I was kind of free to just like think about this on my own terms. There wasn't like a package that was presented to me. And I think it becomes very difficult to do that kind of reflection when you have a 5-year waiting list for treatment at an adolescent service, because, you know, you don't have to be certain like in your teens. You have to be certain before your teens, significantly before your teens, if you actually want to get access to this treatment. Obviously, nowadays it's been completely banned. So, you know, it's completely academic. All those kids are being failed right now. But like, even with a 5-year waiting list, but it's for a appointment, it's like.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that, because like that narrative is out there, and I recognize that there's differences in how healthcare is provided between the United Kingdom and places like the United States or in other parts of the world, where people get this impression of you tell someone you're trans and the next day, puberty blockers, hormones, here's just, we'll see you once, here's your prescription, go be a dude, go be a girl. Whereas the reality, and this is reality the whole time, at least under the public health system in the UK, which is that it would take you years before you even got an assessment, and even what we learned from the CAST report, which sort of detailed how care was being provided at Tavistock. And while it was heavily critical of the care that was provided at Tavistock, one thing that sort of stood out was that like it took forever to get in, And even once you're in, very few people actually got onto puberty blockers or hormones, or once they did, they were almost aged out of, of pediatric care. So it wasn't like, at least in the UK, under the public health system, that these I'm not going to say horror stories, but the kind of stories that raise a lot of ire among people who don't understand the issue of kids sort of being transed, as they say.
Sure.
Immediately you have to wait years before you could even get the care, the care that you needed, because you had the perspicacity, you had the forethought of recognizing yourself. And the other thing is that you clearly are we're a thoughtful child. You're a thoughtful adult, and I'm sure you were a thoughtful child as well. So you were thinking about, like, is this right? Is this wrong? You were doing this whole, the whole kind of, Hamlet-esque consideration of self that many kids, that I joked about, aren't famous for. Like, a lot of kids are impulsive. Or don't have the same capacity to think through long-term consequences of what we can all agree is a highly consequential decision. And when I think of, like, who is successful in this, it's probably the kids like you who are thoughtful and sober-minded as adolescents, which, many kids are, who can sort of handle that. So you finally, you wait years and years and years, and you're kind of living in this gender non-conforming way where, to your peers, where at least you'll have some plausible story when you do decide to transition. It's like, oh, well, she or they were always kind of a little bit unusual in their presentations. This kind of makes sense. When did you finally sort of like start telling all the people around you that I'm Theresa, I'm a girl, and here's how I'm going to be living?
So I actually did it as like a staged thing. For a period of time, I adopted like what we'd call nowadays like a non-binary identity.
Yeah.
And I did that for a significant period of school, and I was in quite a complicated situation. And anyway, for endocrine reasons, I have a couple of genetic variations that meant that I was very late starting puberty, and the actual processes involved were significantly impacted by like a malformation of the neurons in the pituitary gland.
Okay.
The moderate release of
sex hormones and
yeah, exactly. So I was in a situation where I was already kind of a very androgynous looking teenager, and like that really kind of helped, because I think a lot of people just kind of went, yeah, okay, well, that figures, you're a bit weird, okay, whatever. When I started like formally presenting like femme, I guess you could call it, then that was very different. Like that really opened the floodgates, because that kind of pushed beyond the benefit of doubt, if you like. Yeah. And I remember some very obnoxious kids kind of holding court in the playground, basically, and being like, well, girls will be girls and boys will be girls. And right. I kind of, at that point, I realized, like, right, okay, yeah, people aren't going to be chill about this, are they? Like, I kind of knew they weren't going to be chill about it, but like, yeah, it's the realization that they're not going to be chill about it, like at your school either. That kind of made me realize that actually, if I wanted to be safe, then I was going to have to be very careful about what I did, and I was going to have to be very careful about information security, and basically just start a new life. So I kind of that became my plan. Say again, sorry.
So did you have to switch schools and switch?
I didn't switch schools because I figured actually that was potentially going to be more of an issue than just transitioning at school. And then once I left school, went off to university, just complete cut off. Yeah. And I guess, you mentioned in a post a few days ago, Laura, that like, I think it was a bit easier to do that in those days because you didn't necessarily have such a digital footprint. Yeah. So for me, you know, I was literally able to have a completely blank slate.
Right.
But yeah,
a couple questions though about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So when you decided to kind of present fem, had you already started taking any kind of medications, or was it still just like talk therapy?
So it was about the same time that I started GnRH agonists. That I was just like, oh, screw it.
Puberty blockers, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And did that just like that whole going out and presenting, even with the negative feedback? I guess I'm kind of going back to an earlier question. Did that solidify that even in spite of all of this, this still feels better than before? I guess I'm going back to like, how do you know you're not regretting it? And I know transition's slow and we take slow steps and each step confirms, you know, along the way. So I just would love to hear how you kind of like, yep, this is for me, even though this sucks, you know, how they're treating me.
Yeah. So I kind of, I guess you could say I played it softly at first. I experimented with like androgynous presentation. And then when I started on GN and RH agonists, I confided like what was actually going on to a couple of other people at school, like other kids, and to a teacher. Ironically enough, this teacher, who was incredibly chill, really, really, really supportive and absolutely amazing, was called, are you ready? Anne Rowling.
Not the same one.
Obviously not the same one. The coincidence is not lost on me.
Yeah. Wow.
It's very surreal.
Yeah.
Like when you know all this stuff started, it was just like I don't believe it. I just, this is so nuts. But anyway, yeah, I had a very supportive teacher who had my back like all the way through. The moment I confided in her what was actually going on, she was just like, right, okay, I will sign you off PE lessons and like, what do you need? And she was amazing. Honestly, she was really, really, really good.
Did you have to like, what did you do for like bathrooms and stuff and gym and like, how did you navigate all of those environments while you're kind of in this, what I would call maybe an in-between state? I don't know.
So this was a thing at the time. There was like no guidance for schools whatsoever, and the reason why I was signed off PE lessons and similar was basically so it wasn't really a thing. So at the time at school, we didn't have the same kind of foundation of advocacy, and so the school wouldn't have supported me using like girls' toilets, for example.
Because you were still on the roster officially, even after starting GnRHs as a boy.
Again, like social transition in the way that we understand it now wasn't really a thing back then, and it wouldn't have been supported by the school in the way that it was even just like a few years later.
See, when I think of transition, at least the rules of the early 2000s, you know, I often, and, you know, maybe these were the rules for adults, but you know, maybe there's more flexibility for children, recognizing the nuance of that situation, where, you know, we always think of it as, well, you have to be socially transitioned. If you're going to get hormones, it's got to be like, jump right in. This is your life now. Like, you know, what we often, or at that point, called this overnight test. Yeah. So it sounds though there was some flexibility where they were willing to, you know, recognize the reality of the situation of what a transition would have looked like for I don't know what they were, 14, 15, 16-year-old at school, and saying, well, but clearly this is going to be good for your mental health, and we know what the directionality is. So it sounds like there was some flexibility.
Yeah, again, it was all so kind of like uncharted territory.
Seat of the pants management.
Yeah. And like some teachers were cool with it, some teachers were not cool with it.
Right.
And like, you know, again, I think certainly people who are growing up in like this social climate, I think it's very hard for them to understand like just what it was like.
Yeah.
How like aggressively transphobic our society was. like in the late 90s and early 2000s, this was like gay jokes were like the peak of humor to kids at school, and like teachers could get in trouble for like challenging that, basically. Because of the bizarre legislation that our government put in. And so like it was massively variable. It was so dependent on individual teachers, and even the supportive ones were basically scared to even acknowledge what was happening because of the chilling effect that this anti-LGBT legislation had. Like,
this is the Section 28 that
they weren't allowed to formally support me because of the shadow of all of this.
Right. So did you use like a staff bathroom or something, or did you just watch your back, go into the boys' bathroom, or how did you navigate that?
I mean, I had to grit my teeth and use the boys, and it friggin' blew. It was, at least I didn't have to use changing rooms or do sports, because I mean that would have just been pure hell. But I was kind of spared.
Did you ever have issues in the bathroom? Like,
I mean, I think it would probably be better to ask. Were there times when I didn't have issues? Like, really? It was a tough time.
So you like put on your armor every time you go in, like just ready for something.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough being a teenager, right? But being a teenager in that context, I mean,
do you mind sharing like
it's pure hell.
Some stories, like what?
Oh my god! So like,
if you're not comfortable, that's fine. I just really want people to understand what this is like.
Yeah, and I think especially in the current context where like where people say, "Oh, what's the big deal?" The men's washroom isn't dangerous. Men are good. Most men are good people. Just go use the men's room, even if you look female.
And anyone who says that has no idea what it is like any kind of statement along those lines is so profoundly out of touch with the reality of what teenagers actually go through. I mean, geez, like just before I was exempted, like being in like a changing room at school was just pure hell. I mean, the way other kids just, Jesus. God, I almost don't want to talk about it, but like, Christ almighty,
right?
Putting kids in general into like open changing rooms is like friggin' awful. But putting a trans kid into that situation is, I mean, it's really, really nasty, really tough. Like just the constant barrage of homophobia and transphobia. I mean, most kids at the time just, made it into a homophobia thing because they weren't really able to conceptualize the difference. And, it was horrific. I mean, just constant. It was just a constant barrage every single day. And it was really apt. Your description of putting your armor on is the only way you can survive.
Like teenage boys will jump on you for any deviation from the code, no matter how small. So imagine, like I can imagine, presenting in a way that is completely gender non-conforming or hyper-feminine, as it may have been interpreted at the time, would have been as close to maybe not a death sentence, but you're going to get your ass handed to you on whether it be verbally or physically.
Was there regular like physical violence against?
So less so for me, because I basically trained myself to be as like small and non-confrontational as possible. Like I very swiftly realized that actually if I fought back in that context specifically, I was not doing myself any favors. But like I did a couple of times. There were a couple of other kids who like I gave as good as I got, and that did actually kind of like change the temperature, if you like. But like the verbal abuse just, oh my God. Yeah. Like anyone who says trans girls should use boys' facilities is so They're completely with the reality.
But
not just
really
with boys, like
right?
what men are like, especially men in groups and men in who are in any state of inebriation. A lot of people talk about it like I'm a man and I'm fine. I would treat a trans woman nicely if they ended up, because whatever, they're professional adults, and maybe they specifically wouldn't. But we all know what men in groups are like, and what men who drink are like, and what young men are like, and how they deal with people who look different, act different, behave different. I think we all know the stories that are going to happen. If a bathroom ban is truly implemented, in the UK or elsewhere. And so I think these are just really, important real life experiences, to get out there.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for sharing that as well. Exactly. Like, I know that's not easy, but I really want to stress it now with the conversations that are happening now. Like, we need to hear these perspectives, because you can make the argument that, oh, well, if men are mostly nice, then why can't a trans woman be in a woman's bathroom, right? Like, the argument can go both ways. Like, it's so goofy to me, the whole bathroom thing, and nothing stops an aggressive man from going into women's bathroom anyway. So
you're 16. Silly. Yeah, you're 16-ish. You have supportive parents. You get referred to the Tavistock, and you're started on puberty blockers. We're hearing a lot nowadays about that the studies on puberty blockers do not show, or do not convincingly show, that they're effective in improving outcomes for young people. And the justification is often given. The justification is often given when you look in the cohorts. There's two things that happen. One is that the mental health scores don't improve on puberty blockers of people who start them. And the second is that most kids who end up on puberty blockers, they say it's this sort of like gateway drug, in a sense, to cross-sex hormones, to getting or gender-affirming hormone therapy.
Well, I've got a better phrase that I hear now: chemical castration.
Yeah, it's
the same drugs that they put Alan Turing on.
Yes. So what was the actual experience? What was your experience as a adolescent being on puberty blockers? Did it make you feel better? And did it make you more sure that you were going to end up on cross-sex hormones?
So it is worth pointing out that like so much of these narratives, if you like, they're effectively taking the reality of what it's like to be in this situation, and they're flipping it. So like, I was in a situation where, for genetic reasons, I was very, very lucky. Like, I already had like a partially suppressed puberty, and the changes that I did have were very, very limited compared to what like they could have been and what they were like in my peers, for example. But upon starting GnRH agonists, like, it would be fair to say a sizable portion of the relief that you feel is psychological, because
it's not going to get worse.
The changes that are causing you so much horror, so much misery, so much dysphoria are being stopped. So from that perspective, it's like, I am safe now. Things will not get worse.
You can breathe.
Yeah, exactly. It's an enormous sense of relief, psychologically speaking. And this is what professionals are talking about when they talk about the like psychological effects. GnRH agonists for trans young people are not antidepressants. They should not be assessed as antidepressants, because that is not how they operate. What they do is they create an environment where we feel that we have time to breathe, basically. We know changes are not progressing. I mean, I wanted, and like most trans kids wanted, cross-sex hormones, right? I don't want to be put on GnRH agonists. I wanted to be put on estrogen.
Yeah, because your peers are developing, and
exactly. It would have been lovely to have been able to keep up with my peers in that regards, and like hit all those milestones together. So like they're a concession. This is the thing. Like what we ask for when we go to these clinics is, can I have hormones? Can I have estrogen? Or for trans boys, can I have testosterone? And like the puberty blockers are a kind of well, let's hold on a moment here. Yeah. Let's allow you to not decline in your mental health and not experience these changes that are avoidable, that will make things much harder for you. Yeah. But like, they're not antidepressants. And it's so weird to see people kind of misrepresenting research and presenting narratives whereby it's like, oh, we didn't see an improvement in mental health. It's like, well, that's not their fault.
That's not what they're for. And I think that's such an important point, because when people, amazing. When people, who are the doubters, the skeptics about the benefits of pediatric medical transition, and they point, on paper correctly to the fact that in these cohorts, like in the most recent, let's say, Olson-Kennedy cohort from UCLA, that they didn't show an improvement after 2 years. But what they didn't show is what they can't show is what would have happened
the degradation
over the years if those children weren't having it. So yes, maybe they didn't get better, in terms of their mental health scores. But what I would expect if you are a truly long-term dysphoric adolescent or child, and you have to watch your puberty progress over those 2 years, that if you're, a young, someone who was born natally male, and you're watching your facial hair come in, and you're watching whatever the chest hair and the other, facial changes come in, is what effects would those have had in the absence of therapy? And so you're not comparing, I'm supposed to be better, to some neutral. What you're really comparing is staying neutral
right.
is a win. Because the natural history one would expect would be a deterioration. And we haven't, and like that's such an easy story to tell. You told it so succinctly. And yet in the papers, they're always like, well, puberty blockers have never shown a benefit. And it's like, well, of course they don't. What you're seeing is the absence of a deterioration that one would naturally expect if you were if you're a dysphoric person and you're watching your body change in irreversible ways, whether that's as whether that's as a trans boy or a natal female, developing hips and breasts, and or whether it's as a trans girl, watching her jaw become more chiseled, or whatever those changes might be, and how horrifying that is. So like I said, it's such an easy story to tell, and you tell it from your own experience so beautifully. So
the other argument is that anyone who gets on puberty blockers, they always transition, go to cross-sex hormones. And I would love to hear your reaction to that.
Sure. Okay. So like this whole thing, once again, we're talking about flipped narratives and like flipped relationships. Like cause and effect is being flipped here. To get to the point where you're prescribed GnRH agonists as a trans kid, trans adolescent, you have already been assessed effectively for cross-sex hormones. The puberty blockers are a concessionary measure. So like all of that filtering, all of those kind of diagnostic steps, all of that assessment, that's effectively trying to get to a point where the number of people who are prescribed GnRH agonists is a one-to-one relationship with the number of people who will benefit from cross-sex hormones. Because otherwise, what's the point in prescribing? So like...
Right. So you're saying they've already met the criteria for like cross-sex hormones, but because of their age or for whatever reason, let's do this instead, and then in a couple of years you can move on to cross-sex hormones.
Yeah. This is the thing. We're asking for cross-sex hormones. They're like, well, we can't give you those. We can give you these. This is a concessionary measure. And so like when people talk about, 98% of kids who are prescribed these GnRH agonists go on to cross-sex hormones, it's like, well, yeah, that's the point, because you've already been...
It's a cohort effect.
Well, I think that's an issue with our arguments, that at least that I've heard, is that, puberty blockers are time to decide. And then the argument back is, well, everyone who gets on them always decides to transition. So it's not really working as a, we're not sure right now, so we're going to put you on puberty blockers.
And the other thing that's changed.
If I may,
please,
one of the other things that gets quoted all the time, like specifically in relation to the Tavistock JIDs, was like this 4,400% increase in kids turning up, and like that's a 44 times increase in like a number of kids. Like I think there's like maybe 20 of us the year I was referred. So like, okay, that's what, like maybe 1,000 kids. That's not a terrifying number. That's like, it would be weird if it wasn't, and it would be indicative that like basically people aren't finding out about the existence of these services.
Yeah. So there's a few things like, when I hear that, because you're right, from an absolute perspective, going from 50 people a year to, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000, whatever the number is, people a year, on an absolute level isn't large. But when you have a system that's designed for 50 people a year, and now you're getting 1,000 people a year or several hundred people a year, it's easy for that system to get overwhelmed. And that was often manifesting in the UK in terms of exceedingly long wait lists. But that was manifesting in other parts of the world, maybe in the UK to some extent too, was that, you talk about sort of this gauntlet that you had to run to get on puberty blockers, which meant only the most serious, sober-minded, good candidates are going to get on, who are the ones who we know are going to do well on cross-sex hormones, and they're going to go on and live their lives, to the more recent phenomenon where, and how this manifested in different places in the NHS, it manifested as wait lists. In America, it manifested as, well, we cannot do these complicated long-term assessments. We are just going to affirm people and get them on therapy. So you have a change in the cohort. You have all these people, not the ones like yourself, but people who are maybe not as strong as candidates, people who hadn't been giving us the same degree of sober reflection, people who aren't necessarily as forward thinking as far as what are all the potential good and bad consequences that can happen, getting on therapies that maybe do not suit them as well as the suited you. And also in an environment where it wasn't like the people who ran gender clinics could go and say, hey, we've got all these new patients, can you triple, quadruple, increase our funding by 10 times? Because they'd be like, gender clinics? Screw that. Like, we got people with strokes, we got people with dementia, we got people with all sorts of other, even if you talk pediatric stuff, we have all sorts of other, we have pediatric cancer, we have inflammatory bowel disease. These are real diseases. Like, why are we going to give money to gender clinics? And so it's easy to explain how the situation happened, but at the same time, I have concerns, even as a clinician, that are the kids today, this, or not as one-on-one, because of course there's kids like yourself who certainly do exist today. But there's also a lot of kids who are being screened less formally, getting access to therapy that they wouldn't, whether it's through private sources, whether it's through less regimented or stringent screening criteria, who get on these drugs. What is your sense of what is going on today?
So I think this is one of these situations where we have to be absolutely razor sharp and crystal clear about what is actually happening, the dynamics that are actually involved here. And we cannot do that when we exist in an environment where anyone who publishes a report is going to find themselves suppressed if their findings are not liked, for example. Right. We need clinicians to be able to discuss these kinds of dynamics. We need diagnostic criteria to be like depoliticized, I guess. Because right now, if you, as a clinician, if you publish a report, it literally doesn't matter what you say. you are inherently engaging in a political act.
Yes, most definitely.
And like, it's terrifying. I do not envy people in this position, because you can't have a normal conversation about this. You can't talk about diagnostic criteria without like that being turned into an endorsement for banning the treatment wholesale.
But that goes both ways. Like, you would agree that goes both ways to some extent, because before there was sort of the right-wing backlash and sort of outrage machine got generated. If you were to publish something to say, let's say that some kids shouldn't transition, or maybe it's not the best choice for some kids, even if they are presenting with dysphoria or claiming a gender identity that is different from the one they were presumed to be born with, that everybody should transition because we always affirm someone's identity and we put them on the path to. And if
saving lives.
Yeah. And if you would have published a study, let's say in 2015, that sort of said, no, there's some outcomes that are bad. That the same kind of, there would have been some forces coming from the we must affirm everybody side that says that when you put data like that out into the real world, that it's damaging to the concept of transness in general, and it becomes in some ways a bit the almost forbidden words from the other side. And I agree now what's happening, and the reason people, let's say like Dr. Wilson Kennedy in the States, probably did hold back or was very careful about when she was going to present her data that eventually showed that puberty blockers don't have a clear benefit. That she was fearing the other thing, which was that this data would be weaponized by the right wing to say that to support as further justification for supporting bans, when what she's really seeing, because she's a clinician with face-to-face experience with trans kids, is she knows what these benefits are, even if they're not necessarily manifesting in how the study is reporting. So I think there is sort of a bit of a quelling of speech, or the quelling or at least some inhibition to reporting what your data really shows, because at one point people were fearing that if you're not affirming anybody, that you are doing something that is anathema to respecting people's identity. And now it's, if you're showing something that is potentially positive, that you are showing data that supports the mutilation of children. There's no real win here.
There is no real win. You cannot have a normal conversation.
Yes.
In an environment that is so politically charged. It's like if someone is hovering over your shoulder, pointing a gun at your head, waiting for you to breathe wrong, you're never going to be able to act normal. You're constantly going to be trying to survive, basically. And it's broadly the same, I think, with healthcare professionals right now. There is so much contention here, and every time a report comes through, you can't trust it anymore. You've got to look at it and be like, who wrote it? What conflicts of interest do they have? What is their agenda? Who is pursuing this? Who is funding this? What do they want to achieve? And you can't do science and research in that environment. We must depoliticize this entire thing. We must allow clinicians to be able to actually pursue research into this subject in a way where they do not have to fear what they publish being instantly misinterpreted and turned into a cudgel to beat people over the head with. I mean, don't research it if anything you publish is going to be twisted and turned into a nonsense excuse to ban it, because it just don't give them ammunition. And so I understand why clinicians don't. I understand why people have been so scared to do this, is that you say something completely normal about the findings, and then a month later, all the papers are screaming something that just patently isn't true. Right. You see it with the CAS review. The CAS review said, we need further research into this. Of course we need further research into this. The CAS review didn't advocate for completely banning this treatment for all under 18s in the UK. But guess what happens? And this just happens again and again and again. And like, you cannot, in this political environment, you basically just cannot publish anything right now because it is going to be weaponized. And you have the same thing with like any kind of neuroscience research that is in any way, shape, or form related to either transness or like sex differences. Like, who's going to publish that kind of thing? Like, anyone with a conscience will look at that and be like, geez, no way. I'm not even touching that, because you just can't. We don't live in the world where that is something that's almost morally defensible right now.
Do you think it's risky though to obviously you have to be brave and you might lose your job and take a lot of flack, but do you think it's risky to make, so the argument is all or nothing. It's so heavily sided, especially in the US. The left holds back information because they're afraid if you give them the truth, then that'll be a weapon. And the right holds back information because of the same reason. And my argument against that approach is that, well, if you're afraid of truth, then you're never going to be speaking in truth. So then you're just making everything up anyway. Like, if you're intentionally holding back findings or whatever it is, aren't you just propagating the problem that your side is lying, and you have a political agenda if you're withholding information for a political reason?
I think the problem is when you talk about truth, that word doesn't mean the same thing.
Sure.
Like the actual reality is that, like, there is a large amount of research into this subject, and it is consistently disregarded, misrepresented. Like there was that
explained away.
The famous 80% desistance study from like ages ago. It's a really good example of this. It assessed gender non-conforming kids. Like it didn't assess trans kids. It didn't assess kids expressing a transgender identity.
Yeah, it was effeminate kids.
Yeah, exactly. And like people are saying, oh, 80% desisted. And it's like, well, duh.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, they weren't trans, right? Yeah.
It's exactly. And this is the problem that we have, is that it's not that like researchers who are researching this and actually genuinely care about the truth are scared of the truth. Yeah. They're scared of the opposite. They are scared of the truth being deliberately misinterpreted and misrepresented by people with an agenda who, like, it's really transparent when they do this. So it's so hard to argue against it.
Yeah, like
if we withhold the truth because we're scared of the truth being twisted, then we're still not getting truth out, right? Like, we're still losing.
Yeah, we're in a bit of a bind, admittedly, because like the part of the challenge, and I'm saying this from the perspective of trying to be a dispassionate researcher and knowing how to do research and what the limitations of research are, is that we are dealing with inherently bad data sources. No matter what question we're looking at, with regarding to outcome and you know, for trans outcomes, especially for children, is we have bad data. And it's hard to have good data because a lot of our data is dependent on self-report. People are inclined, when they self-report, to report their experiences in ways that are sympathetic to themselves. We see that no matter what we're studying. It's hard to go back, and we can't look inside people's brains to know what they're actually feeling.
Maybe low quality is better than bad. Like,
well, I mean,
it's still data, right? It's still
I'm going to say bad. Okay. And the reason I'll say it is because it has enough bias in it that you don't know if it is representing the truth or some. Yeah. So you have data like that. And then you also have that we as a population are very hard to study because of two reasons. Is that a lot of teenagers, being teenagers, don't like filling out surveys. They don't like showing up to clinics for, to fill out these surveys.
Or they're contrarians. They want to do the opposite of whatever.
Or they fill them out, because it's funny to say you're trans, in these more population-based, I'm going to be a goof and fill this out. And then also, like, when people disappear, you don't know why they're disappearing. You don't know why they're disappearing because it's like, I'm done being trans. I want to move on with my life, and I want to just get on with being a woman.
Yeah.
Or you don't know whether they're filling it out because they're like, fuck this clinic who ruined my life. I don't want to do any more work for them. So I'm not filling this out. And so you have incomplete outcomes, you have incomplete follow-up, you have incomplete definitions about what people's experiences are like, and then you're trying to interpret it. So and then you have also just data where you're using proxy outcomes, which is you don't really, you're using a big database where someone maybe saw a doctor, got coded as depression, but you don't know why they're depressed.
Yeah.
And so we often see studies, even by sympathetic researchers, that show things like, if you have, let's say, surgery, that you are 19 times more likely to commit suicide, or 5 times more likely to see a doctor for depression. And the people whose agenda it is to ban care, I hesitate to say right wing, because some of these people are otherwise even liberal now, but people who don't like the idea that people can transition, who will jump on that data and take the worst possible interpretation of it. So they're happy to use bad, low quality data when it supports their agenda, and deny the low quality data that supports our agenda, let's say. Yep. So they pick and choose in terms of what data they're happy to show a bad study that shows that transness, that having gender affirming care is associated with higher rates of suicide, even though the data that supports that is poor. Yet when we come in with our data that says, well, look, like the regret rate is 1%, or that 90% of people are satisfied with their care, they're like, low quality data, throw this out, can't use it.
Well, it's the same we saw in 2003. The Bush administration found the data they needed to invade Iraq. They had a stack of reports, and they went. I saw a documentary. They had a stack of reports saying unlikely weapons of mass destruction. I know this is a really weird comparison, but I'm military. This is what I do. Unlikely weapons of mass destruction. If they did, they've dismantled it, or they've moved them to Syria. There's all these reasons why it's probably not a good idea to invade Iraq right now, especially we're hunting bin Laden right now and in this whole other country. And the Bush administration, I don't know if it was Bush himself, but people in that administration wanted to find me a reason to invade this country. It's basically what it turned out being.
People love confirmation bias.
Right. And so I think what you just described is very similar. There is some data that said, he might have had weapons of mass destruction, but there was a lot of other data that said otherwise, and they just found the data that they wanted for their argument at the time. And I don't think that's a new thing. That is so very common when we politically bias things, right?
Like, one of the things we don't have yet, and it's something that I've really advocated for, is, we have groups like GenSpect or SEGM that clearly have a motivation to present data and to extract data in a way that's going to support the narrative that says that pediatric transition, perhaps even all transition, is bad. We have people like WPAF who are also somewhat ideologically motivated to say transition is good and we have to affirm all identities, and that any data that shows that there may be negative outcomes, or that there are reasons to believe that maybe regret is higher than it is, they don't want that out there either. What we don't have are really dispassionate people who are respectful of the trans experience, but are willing to look at data in a sober-minded, dispassionate way. And it's really something that I think is a huge gap in our advocacy right now, is that we have you may not agree with this, but there is definitely extremist elements on the anti-side. And then there are people who, and I'm not saying they're necessarily doing it because they're bad people, because they recognize that it's important to put a narrative out there that is strongly pro-trans, because any chinks in the armor are going to be exploited. We don't have anyone operating from, this is what it is.
Well, I think we once again, we come back to what we were talking about earlier with that 98% continuation rate. It's like, you can publish some pretty ambiguous stats that diagnostic assessment is working really well.
Yeah.
And yet the narrative that somehow falls out as soon as groups like SEGM and GenSpect get their hands on it is like, oh my God,
what is the worst possible interpretation?
Trans. Yeah. And just how are you getting this interpretation? How are you presenting this data in this way? It's so profoundly dishonest. Right. And this is the problem. So when we talk about people unconditionally finding that transition is the fix to these problems, I don't think that's actually true most of the time. Like, I'm sure some people, like everyone's subject to bias, but like there is an artificial symmetry being presented here by groups that have a vested interest in banning all transition, that plays very fast and loose with the truth and takes literally everything that's published,
and those groups
and
are much
tries to find that weird little tweak that makes it.
They're much better funded, and they have better connections with the media, and they have much richer networks in terms of how to get this information out there.
Or they're just louder, right? So like
I heard,
like they like to take also every organization has bad apples. And so I'm not a fan of WPATH in general recently, but the recent news about one of the guys being connected to pedophilia, did you all see that?
Yeah.
One of the original guys in WPATH. And anyway, I only heard of this because I'm a longtime listener of Joe Rogan, and he recently had Graham Lennon on, which we all know Graham Lennon's very pro-trans, like that guy. I'm just kidding.
So that's Glinner, for those of you.
Yeah, Glinner. So he brought this up, and he made it a huge point of the conversation with Joe about how WPATH is rooted in the idea of going after young children, transing them, abusing, and it completely overshadowed any, like you're saying, any of the data that does not support that at all. Now, I don't know if that was the origins of WPATH or not. I don't think we need WPATH. We could have a different organization that does similar things. Maybe that's fine too. But the idea that like, oh, this one guy happened to be connected to this organization, therefore the whole organization, everything they did is bad, is kind of like saying anyone else it's like saying the entire Catholic Church is bad. And some people might believe that, but...
Or the U.S. military is bad because they're soldiers who committed war crimes or whatever.
Exactly, right? So it's just, it's amazing, like you're talking about, Theresa, you pointed out so accurately the politically charged climate. So now a lot of folks who heard that conversation, and Graham seems to have like sympathy for trans people in a lot of other ways, which is very nuanced, and I did appreciate that part of the discussion, but the whole confirmation bias of, this is an organization that's led by crazy left-wingers that are pedophiles, and it's all corrupt from the beginning. It really overshadowed even a lot of the good points that Graham was making about trans adults and the experiences he had with good quote-unquote.
The point is that Joe Rogan is much more sympathetic to getting people like Graham Linehan on who are going to espouse those points of views than he would be to having someone who would espouse, fair-minded but complimentary. Yeah, and
sure,
you're not getting on Joe Rogan just yet. Maybe you will one day.
I was just using it as a point as that politically charged climate where there is truth in what Graham was saying, but it doesn't mean that that's what trans people are, or that's what the organization was trying to do. Right?
I want to get back to just to your life, Theresa, because what I really want to what we often hear about is these negative narratives about what happens to kids who get exposed to transition early. And here we are 20, 25 years later of someone who transitioned or started their transition as an adolescent, and you look great, but you're clearly not an adolescent any longer. Sorry.
People age.
People do age. Yeah. Maybe not me. But you had an adulthood where, by your own story, that you were not someone who was public in any meaningful way about having this history of having transitioned as an adult. So what is it like being, getting through this system and then having to go out in the world and, living as a woman, and I'm someone who still, despite all the people who say I shouldn't anymore, that trans women are women. You are undoubtedly, I can tell by how you look, how you present yourself, that you were almost 120% of the time were interpreted as being female. Are you, I think of the best way to put this. This was clearly a positive experience for you.
Overwhelmingly so, yeah.
Yeah. Would you, were there times though that you were like, this is a hard life? or this is not a life I would have chosen?
So I don't have, I guess, a context to compare it to directly. Like I have been an adult woman for all the time that I've been an adult, and like my interactions with society have always been in that social mode. So like I can't directly understand what it's like kind of not to be, if you get what I mean. But like I have an imagination and I can empathize with other human beings, right? So like one of the things that I will say it is that I think it is the case now as well. And it certainly was the case when I was like in my late teens and early 20s. It's absolutely terrifying. Basically because you are acutely aware of the fact that every single person you meet probably hates you and doesn't realize it yet.
Yeah.
And that is unfortunately the stark and sober reality that I spent my late teens and my 20s in, was that basically it was a survival strategy to conceal this aspect of my history, because otherwise I would effectively just be going straight back to the hell that I had it at school. I escaped. Basically, I escaped the prison of people being aware of what was increasingly becoming a distant and largely irrelevant aspect of my childhood. And I had to basically just never talk to anyone about it. And that was very isolating and very lonely, and at times extremely stressful, because it was very frightening. Like if the topic came up abstractly in conversation, for example, I would constantly be finding myself thinking, well, do I say anything? What happens if I come on too strong in support of trans people? Like it's dangerous in that kind of social environment to even express trans supportive views. And so, like that is the stark reality that like
so in your life, you were living yeah. So in your adult life, it sounds like you were living in a way that, the term we often use is stealth or even deep stealth. So you were living in a life where nobody, probably except your closest intimates, to the extent that you might have had.
I told nobody. I told nobody. I was just like, that's it.
So the reason I want to bring this up, and you sort of use words like loneliness and not feeling like it's like I think very evocatively saying like people love you, people don't realize how much they hate you, when they're talking to you, and so one of the narratives that often comes up in sort of the anti-transition is that even among the people, like here you are, you undoubtedly physically came across as unequivocally female. You were able, how people interpreted you in society was they were treating you like the woman that you no doubt wanted to be treated at. But at the same time, because of this history of having transition, people will say that it's still a miserable, maybe not miserable is the right word, but still a challenging life. And is this what are we telling kids? That this is what their life is going to be like? That it's going to be, I'm giving you the worst case, like it's going to be lonely. You're going to have a hard time finding a partner, finding love. You're going to have a hard time, or never will be able to have a family. And this is in a best case scenario where you look at someone. This is like you're not someone who is going to be pointed at in the street and be mocked and ridiculed for your appearance, but still. That dating pool becomes very small. That the number of people who you can really welcome into your life and say, this is who I am, is very small. That you're always on the run. You're always... is it...
Yeah. Oh, go on. Ask a question.
Are we getting a fair accounting? Like, here you are, you're the best, you're the good outcome. I'm not saying the only good outcome, but you're a good outcome. And we still talk about these elements that cause a lot of pain. Are we getting fair accounting?
They do, but I think that is something that a lot of members of marginalized minority groups also face. I mean, the origin of the term passing was initially kind of couched in in race and discrimination there are.
Yeah, white passing.
And exactly. And like the dynamics are not the same, and I would never claim that they are the same. They are different, but like there is a utility in using some similar terminology, in that like the way that I was able to live my life and have been able to live my life for a very long time is that the daily abuse that trans people receive was not targeted at me. Like, I still heard the way people talked about trans people. That was still terrifying. There were still situations where I would find myself having to be very careful, for example, when talking about my past, about my childhood and that kind of thing. So like it wasn't something that became completely irrelevant. But at the same time, what it effectively did was it just let me get on with my life. And like, I cannot overstate how incredible that is. Like when I started this journey all those years ago, I could not have imagined that would have realistically been something that was achievable. And like the fact that I've been able to do it for so long, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And like, I am very conscious of the fact that like, that is not a universal outcome. And like, I got very lucky, even having gained access to GnRH agonists at the time I did. Like, genetics played a very significant part there, and like, it is not a universal journey. But like, so many of these arguments come down to you shouldn't transition because of the way that we will treat you if you do. And that's just completely morally indefensible as an argument. It's saying we shouldn't let you transition because we are going to drive you to the edge of despair constantly every day for the rest of your life if you do. I mean, that's just disgusting. That's horrible. That's not a logical, compassionate, moral argument. That's effectively an abuser saying, I'm going to abuse you, so don't even try and change your situation, because we'll still be there, still waiting to, treat you awfully. And like, that's just heartbreaking and terrifying. And so when I talk about loneliness like that, what I mean by that is the loneliness came from the knowledge that I could never tell anyone about this like huge thing that I went through in my childhood, because in so doing, it would be opening myself up to just all of this horror and awfulness. And like,
and it robs you of your womanhood too. Like, well,
it does. You cannot go back on that. People do act differently when you disclose that kind of thing. Even if they claim they don't, they do. They genuinely do treat you differently, because like we are but flawed humans, Yeah. And like, I treat people differently if I find out that they are trans. I can't not. There are things that I will say that I might
not say if you didn't
say or not say. You know what I mean? We do modulate our behavior based on facts that we know about other people.
I mean, we are different too.
Yeah. The argument that broadly is being presented by groups like Sex Matters and similar right now, that like it's immoral to tell a child that they can change sex, etc. It's a very strange argument, because like they are effectively saying the world in which you grow up kind of sucks for you if you're trans. That's really awful. So you shouldn't try and escape it, because it'll still be awful in some ways. Yeah. And it doesn't make any sense. And it's horrible.
Yeah. And I think it's important, like you said, that like your life, my life, I'm sure Joe's life as well, are, in ways that are in a lot of ways intangible, but are immeasurably better than any life I could have envisioned for myself if I hadn't taken this step. And one of the other like narratives I think is important, like, is that, we're trying, like, you've had this life that you've had a lot of, like you said, it's been very successful, no regrets, maybe disappointments, but no regrets. At the same time, one of my fears is because these stories are so uncommon, or they're not told a lot, is I fear, and I do this with my own story. Like I've also, like, I transitioned 25 years ago as well. Started a little later, but transitioned 25 years ago. And because I've had a lot of things going for me before, including, I think the most important one, which we share, is perspicacity, like that sense of like being able to sort of have a true read on the situation, what's achievable. And but I was able to maintain my career, have a job that makes me a lot of money. I was able to find a partner. We were able to have children together. We were able to present to the world as a normal heterosexual couple living in Canadian suburbia, where we didn't have to tell anybody about our past, where we were able to raise our kids like a normal appearing family. Yeah. And I don't, and one of the things I fear, because I don't hear these stories enough, is, are we presenting an unachievable an unachievable goal for many who don't have the same advantages that maybe you or I did? Are we unicorns in a sense, or are we everybody's true potential? And I fear sometimes when you come out, because these stories are still rare, and people have a lot of reasons why they're not willing to come tell them. Are we truly presenting a vision of what could be? Or are we presenting the same way that when you see models in models in a magazine or on the internet, an unachievable vision of what it means to be trans? Not unachievable absolutely, but unachievable relatively.
I think that we have to be careful to avoid presenting like individual journeys as like a universal experience. But I think we have to be careful with that about every single aspect of life. I mean, the entire concept of like, the American dream, right?
Yeah.
Like, for every person who makes it, there are a lot of people who run into loads and loads of issues. And it's like, it's irresponsible to say that, like, every person will have like a golden path.
Yeah, everybody can be a billionaire if you just work hard enough at it.
And I think like reality doesn't work that way. But I think there's also an element that, like, from what I have been able to gather from talking to other people who have been in similar situations to myself, my story is not that unusual. There are a lot of us out there who, for very smart and sensible reasons, don't, kind of reveal themselves, put their faces out there in public. And like, I would never judge them for not speaking on this this subject. Like, you've got to look after yourself. But yes, there is certainly an element here where we don't hear very many stories like this, because there's a confirmation bias or a selection bias. That diagram of the bomber from World War II, etc., very much factors in there, in that, like, you don't hear from the people who this works out well for, because they just get on with their lives.
Right.
That's it.
Just like, Amazon reviews, like, they tend to be the negative ones, because you're not going to hear from the ones that, like, I bought this thing and it did exactly what I wanted it to, and I moved on, But I think that's a good place to like wrap up. Like, bottom line.
I have one more.
Okay.
Sorry. No, and I could talk forever, but we will wrap.
Yeah.
Because we do have, like, as successful people, we do have that rest of our lives things, going on. But one very important decision that you made that I think is especially difficult is having that. So I have a number of friends as well who transitioned around the same time I did, who I've stayed in touch with over the years, who are very private and remain private about their lives. And, while all of them have had challenges, just like my non-trans friends have had challenges, they are all uniformly satisfied with the choices they've made, with the lives they've been able to lead, with the limitations that are understood. But it's hard to go public.
Very terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, you have done so in a in a maybe a somewhat circumscribed way. But you're a public recognizable face. Here you are with a recognizable face that is going to be, put in for sort of wide distribution, whoever might see it. It's a bold step. There's obviously value in doing it, but there's sacrifice in doing it.
Very much so.
What prompted you to make that sacrifice that so many of us don't?
So broadly, it was the point where GnRH agonists for trans kids were kind of soft banned back in 2020 in the wake of the Kira Bell case. And I'm pretty sure most people who will listen to this will be aware.
Kira Bell is a detransitioner who sued the Tavistock. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're one of the few people who kind of went through the system, gained access to treatment under the age of 18, and later came to regret it. A little bit of background around the case. It was a case that was being presented by Susan Evans, who's an ex-JIDS employee, and she was kind of looking for like a figurehead, if you like, someone to kind of carry this, like a name and a brand.
Yeah.
And Kira Bell kind of landed at that point in time. And ever since then, basic list treatment hasn't really been accessible within the UK. So this was back in 2020.
Yeah.
There was like a soft ban. The NHS initially stopped it. That ruling was then overturned. But that case then was what basically led to the cash review and just started a constant torrent in the papers, like just constantly, basically. And like, if you actually look for the names of detransitioners who went through that system and came to regret it, out of the there's a few thousand of us who were patients of the Tavistock JIDS. How many people detransitioned? How many people do we hear from? It's always the same tiny number. Always.
Yeah.
Nobody ever talks about the rest of us. And there's a good reason for that. Most of us are just getting on with our lives. I could not bear to allow these falsehoods, these false narratives to be perpetuated when I have lived completely opposite in terms of experience to all of that. Not a day goes past where I'm not thankful for having had the opportunities I had, and to see a ban being put through and then made permanent on some very shaky anecdata, effectively. I realized I had to say something. I could not allow these kind of lies and false narratives to just be the only story that people ever hear. Like I had to. I had lived through this. I had kind of made it. It wasn't
a sense of responsibility
story anymore. Yeah. It was the story of the kids who are now being denied that treatment. They are the ones that I'm doing this for. So yeah, that's why I did it. I couldn't not.
Yeah. Well, I as difficult a decision as that was, and I know as difficult as undoubtedly made your life, I know it's sort of opened you up both to, I'm sure you found a lot of people who really support what you're doing, and also a lot of people who are at your throat, constantly. I'm glad you did it for the selfish reasons that it sort of allowed us to sort of connect and, hear another story of, someone who is taking her experience and trying to do the right thing for the right reasons and make, trying to heal a broken world, in a sense. So I'm glad you've done that, like I said, at great personal cost and great personal sacrifice. And I really want to thank you as well for, being willing to continue to put yourself out there, coming into an environment here where, I know we probably asked some difficult questions and brought up parts of your life that maybe aren't always the most comfortable parts of your life to bring up, and sharing them with us and with our audience. And I really, really, really appreciate your being willing to do that and for joining us here today.
Yeah, definitely. And I just wanted to give you the chance, if bottom line, the one thing that you hope people take away from this, what would it be?
Listen to us broadly. If you are only ever hearing one side of this story, if you are never hearing the stories of people who went through this process and are able to, honestly present what it was like, then something is wrong. Listen to us and think about what you are being told. Think about what people gain from presenting certain narratives, and just think about it. There we go.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Great having you here today.
All right, that's all.
Goodbye.
Yeah, have a good one. Bye.
Thanks.
All right. Well,
so wow,
that's all for today, folks.
Yeah, amazing conversation. Yeah. Glad she was willing to come on. I'm sure hopefully it'll generate a lot of attention and a lot of sort of, like I said, hearing a real person's story about their experiences is going to be. I think it's just great to have that information out there. And like I said, we could have talked forever. I like you. I'm getting pretty hungry, I have to admit. But and we have to get on to things. But we will catch up next time for our we will see you all again in the future, and then in the near future with hopefully another exciting guest telling another great story. Anything else for today, Joe?
That's it. See y'all in the next one.
See y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.